Today is Monday, November 4th, and welcome to episode 381 of Fault Lines, NSI's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI's Deputy Executive Director, Martha Miller. I'm joined today by NSI Advisory Board member Lester Munson, NSI Fellow Jessica Jones, and NSI CTC Fellow Jeffrey Wells. If it feels like election season is a nonstop roller coaster of anxiety, with everyone wondering just how secure our votes really are, you're definitely not alone. With Election Day approaching and tensions running high, today we're diving into the crucial topic of election security. In recent days, the FBI has identified multiple fake videos spreading disinformation about supposed ballot fraud, likely originating from foreign actors. Russia, China, and Iran are all ramping up efforts to undermine trust in our election system, with strategies that range from sophisticated cyber attacks to targeted disinformation campaigns on social media. At the same time, U.S. election security has never been stronger, with nearly all voting machines producing paper ballots and cybersecurity experts working around the clock. We'll talk today about fake videos making headlines and look at what's driving these disinformation campaigns. Who should I start with? How about Jessica? How should we interpret the growing involvement of foreign actors like Russia, China, and Iran in this year's election? What do you think motivates their tactics, and how can the U.S. counter them effectively?
You can tell everyone's got an opinion, and Martha's like, who should I pick on first to go? It's funny you say that, I will admit, election season is a roller coaster, but it's not a roller coaster when it comes to secure elections to me. I don't worry about that. I mean, of course, it's troubling when you've got adversarial nation states trying to interfere in the elections. And I commend the federal government for lessons learned from previous elections, being more open and transparent about attempts, being able to read about Russian influence operations, Chinese, Iran. But, however, when CISA's Jen Easterly comes out and says U.S. elections have never been more secure, to be able to have faith in that, you actually have to believe what government officials are saying at some point. And it seems like the faith in election security is becoming more of a partisan issue. A recent Gallup poll had only 28% of Republicans thinking that the election system was fair. And so what's more troubling to me, that's more troubling than these Russian and Chinese attempts, which are focused on social media. It's the idea that if your candidate doesn't win, it wasn't a fair election and there must be some kind of steal of the vote. And that makes me worried for if there is a time between election day and when a winner is actually called, how much dismiss less any kind of information that goes out on social media, what's going to be spread out there. And you see states already, states and local election officials, you've got 2 states already activating their National Guard. You've got law enforcement agencies like having first responders called. You've got election officials wearing bulletproof vests, just ready for potential violence. And that's not normal. And we shouldn't think that's normal. And so unfortunately, I don't have an answer of how to solve that. I don't think Elon Musk and X's feed focused on election integrity, which seems to more or less, which can amplify actually fake information, is the answer. So I don't have an answer, but the first thing is for Americans to stay vigilant. We can look to our friends in the EU that have been attacked, are targets of Russian misinformation like every election. And, they've got smart and informed citizenry who, are on the lookout for, not true information.
Lester, now to you. With polling showing partisan divisions and trust, what steps are essential for restoring faith in the system? Is there a way to bridge the gap in perception so that all Americans feel confident in their votes?
Well, I think Americans ought to be properly skeptical of anything they see on social media. And if there's some video that you've seen that makes it look like every single paranoid conspiracy theory is coming true, you should be doubly skeptical. I think we should be very realistic here. There has always been attempts at foreign interference in our elections. People have always had concerns about the methodology of how we vote. It has by and large been completely secure for our history. People are talking about foreign interference as a way to call into question the vote on one side. And on the other side, they're talking about the mechanisms and people allegedly, doing ballot harvesting and that kind of thing. Be skeptical of all of these things. People, when you're voting, if you're doing it tomorrow in person, by the way, good for you. I'm a little skeptical of early voting, even though I myself early voted this year.
Privileged voter.
I'm a
Okay.
privileged voter. But point being, vote for the person you think is going to do the best job. as president, as the chief executive for the next 4 years. You're hiring someone to do a job temporarily. Ignore all of this sound on both sides. The Russians are not going to secretly manipulate the election. Neither is Iran. It is not going to happen. Go out and vote for the best candidate that meets your expectations for that job.
Jeffrey, you're looking very pensive. With let you comment on what Lester and Jessica have said, and then I have another question for you.
Sure. Thank you, Deputy Executive Director, and esteemed colleagues. Humans, I think the important piece here is remember that as humans, we are hardwired to trust what we see and hear. It's practically stamped in our DNA, much like 2 + 2 = 5. That's why disinformation isn't just a nuisance. It's a stealth weapon that targets our blind spots. And I think that's why it's important to be aware of it, as both of my colleagues have pointed out. I mean, whether it's Russian, Chinese, Iranian, homegrown disinformation campaigns aimed at U.S. elections or elections in general are Orwellian in nature, and they have come to life. Digital deception is a wolf in democracy's clothing, and we need to be skeptical of what we see and hear digitally. Disinformation doesn't just spread like lies. It cranks up the volume to complete distortion, tearing, at the fabric of our democratic trust. And, much like Orwell's Ministry of Truth, flipping the narratives, these campaigns embed doubt so that, so deep that the pillars of society start to sway. 2 + 2 = 5. Fake voter videos that we've seen, like those targeted in Georgia last week, disrupt trust. Even without proof, these make voters question if their voices are going to be silenced, casting a shadow of doubt over the ballot box. And I think that digital meddling is not just chaos for kicks. It's a contagious thing, and others see that it is effective and accelerating. This helps accelerate, I think, the global backslide of democracy at the moment. And every crack that these digital things pry open in our democracy serves as a spotlight of how others can parade themselves as the arbiters of truth. And I think, again, disinformation taps into our instinctual trust, making it a powerful adversary. And with us on one side of the screen and the fight for reality on the other, we're in a world where seeing is believing. The urgency for defense is needed for awareness, and it's cranked up to 5 + 5 = 11.
Are you referring to Spinal Tap?
I am just throwing out information, so you guys can fact check whether or not 2 + 2 = 5 or 5 + 5
You can see
=
if there's
11.
cuts in this video later.
I think if you put those in, there's maybe there's disinformation or misinformation.
So Jeffrey, I did tell you I had another question for you. I appreciate your responding to Lester and Jessica. How should we interpret the growing involvement of foreign actors like Russia, China, and Iran in this year's election? Because I agree with Lester that this has been attempted in the past. However, there's also evidence that they have ramped up their efforts. What are they trying to achieve, and are we countering them effectively?
Well, I think we are countering them effectively. It's still hard to do. Once, I think we talked about Inception a couple of weeks ago. Once an idea is put in place, it's really hard to pry back. As Lester is probably a good evidence here, is that
Every
I think we're
conspiracy
doing a
theory.
good job. But I think why people in general historically try to interfere in elections is to sow chaos and to create an opportunity for them to move forward. We thankfully saw, though, yesterday in Moldova, democracy actually kind of came out on top, and in Georgia it kind of eked by. And so I think that for adversaries of democracy in general are going to continue to use digital tools to create confusion and distrust to try to advance their political objectives. Lester.
Martha, I just want to say, I think what Putin really wants is for Americans to think Russians are somehow influencing our election. Don't believe it. They're not influencing our election. They're not stealing votes. They are not subverting what is going to happen. Our democracy is just fine. You may not like the person who gets elected, but that's how democracy works. Half the people are happy, the other half are unhappy. It doesn't mean the Russians did it.
Well, it's clear that the challenges are real, but so are the defenses. But the real defense is really each and every one of us as individuals and being skeptical of what we see on social media. Please stay informed, stay engaged, and know that your vote is secure. And that's a wrap. Thanks very much to Devlin Burney, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help producing today's episode. Join us again on Wednesday, November 6th for another episode of Fault Lines, the NSI's podcast that gets you smart, fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. Fault Lines is now on YouTube, so check out our channel and for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.